Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back, everyone. You're watching the American Family Association Presents. Tonight our guests are Ed Cox and George Marlin, and we're discussing key issues facing the state of New York in this critical time. Gentlemen, let me get back to another question. Very touchy subject, higher education costs. I mean, every family I know worries about paying for the cost of college education for their children. But in New York State, we've got some 64 state-run colleges, 4-year and 2-year colleges. The bulk of it, 90% plus, paid for by the taxpayers. It's a difficult question. What would you think about the possibility of raising tuitions to cover 80% of the cost of this education, and then at the same time increasing the amount of scholarship aid given to families based on need, on income, so that the very poor families, in effect, maybe come out even better, and that the lower class families don't get hurt by this rise in tuition, but that those who can afford to pay for college, instead of being subsidized 80%, 90% by the taxpayers, are in effect paying more of their own cost of education. George, I'll begin with you.
Why don't we begin with him? You're the SUNY trustee.
Yes,
that's
true.
You're a SUNY trustee.
I've been a SUNY trustee now for 14 years, so I guess look, at the moment, legislate that's an impossibility. We have wanted to get differential tuition, so for those campuses where the costs are higher.
Not differential tuition, the same tuition, but you give scholarship aid based on need.
But we can't get that.
What percentage of SUNY
let me just say
tuition,
that.
of the total budget, what percentage does tuition eat up of the budget, cover the budget?
I would say is the full, depends what you mean. The all-in budget is about $10 billion. The state operated amount, I mean, where the state contributes is about $2 billion. And the tuition, I would say it's 20 to 30% of it. Okay. But one place you have to really be careful is our community colleges. Right from the start, I became an advocate for community colleges 14 years ago, and they do a tremendous job of delivering a great product, teaching. They're one of half of our students. 200,000 of the 400,000 students are community college students, and they believe in teaching. They are democratic institutions, and what they charge is very low, and their costs are low.
And they're lower income families.
And lower income, and they sort it out. You know, you think you're here to get job training. Well, look, you can go on and become a professional. You have that kind of, they love doing that. Or someone is, you know, you should get trained to be a nurse. And frankly, a lot of our job training programs, we have $3 billion of funds that each year go into job training, federal and state funds. And a lot of that is wasted on little training organizations that really don't train people the right way for the jobs that are available. Community colleges know the job is available because they're plugged into the community. More of those funds could be much more effectively used if they went to the community college campuses.
How about the 4-year colleges?
4-year colleges, that's different. They're more expensive. The costs are about double of those of the community colleges, but it's only $4,300. It's now going up to $5,000. In fact, the state legislature required us to raise tuition up to $5,000 by $600. But you know what they then did? They took 80% of that away in order to cover the budget deficit. They taxed the students in the end.
But I mean, should 4-year college tuition at SUNY branches, should that cover more of the costs than they currently
I argued for this Eddie Sullivan was the head of the Higher Education Committee in the Assembly, and 10 years ago, he and I went to his office just to talk with him about higher education, and I suggested that we could raise tuition and have scholarships at the same time.
For the lower income, so they don't get affected.
And he made and I was just absolutely amazed. We were going back and forth, hot and heavy on this, and he said he was against financial aid. But don't tell anyone that, he said. Now, I can say this 10 years later because he's out about it. But he was basically arguing, in his vision of the campus, everyone is equal. Everyone has to be treated the same way. Therefore, you can't give financial aid to anyone. Huh?
That's not the way our income tax structure works or anything else works.
But that,
Medicaid.
But that is, believe it or not, that kind of socialist ideology still persists in the state assembly, and that prevents that kind of thing.
Because what it means is taxpayers are subsidizing a lot of well-to-do families sending their kids to SUNY 4-year colleges.
No, you're absolutely right.
That's true.
I agree with that 100% on the community colleges, which are becoming more and more like trade colleges. Now, there has always been this liberal assumption that everyone should get a bachelor's degree. Well, not everyone should get a bachelor's degree. People should be trained for other areas, and let's face it, electricians right now are in greater demand than Wall Street investment bankers. So,
And the truth is, under the new administration, a union auto worker has more rights than many of the rest of the citizens.
That's an interesting point. Whole different topic, but
But
absolutely true.
again, we question the need for college degrees, but continue.
and the stimulus money, really, they're treating the stimulus money as though it's 1933, a New Deal, which was a blue-collar depression, and this is a white-collar recession. And so I don't see many unemployed investment bankers with shovels working on Long Island Expressway right now. But be that as it may, the community colleges have a very important role in our communities. Nassau Community College, Suffolk Community Colleges are very fine places. A lot of training goes on there for trade jobs, and that's a very important thing. I don't disagree with you. There should be some need on terms of what you pay for tuition going to the state university, where a lot of wealthy people say, hey, go there, give you $5 grand a year instead of spending 40 grand a year. I'll buy you a car when you graduate from college.
Exactly.
The parent is ahead of the game, so I have no argument on that. But Ed outlined the ideological position behind it, and that would be unfair.
And also, am I not correct that a lot of SUNY professors are paid more than private university professors?
Absolutely,
And I don't
and their
understand.
pension, they get
Better
a much better
pensions, health
pension than a
benefits,
guy gets
yeah.
at Fordham University or
It's-
St. John's
it seems
University.
to
I
be,
can
again,
guarantee
it's-
you that.
It's an issue of public versus private institutions. Why should the taxpayers be subsidizing the public professors more, and to an extent that they're being paid so much above the private universities?
Well, it depends which private university is on that. So the fact is, you do need public universities. You do want to give equal opportunity. The community colleges certainly deliver that in a very cost-effective way.
Okay.
Now, at the beginning of our show, Ed mentioned correctly about Medicaid and the role it's playing in the state of New York in terms of how healthcare costs are eating up a significant amount of the state's operating budget. What can New York do to lower these costs, in your opinion,
Well,
George?
let's first of all look at the costs. Right now, Medicaid in the state of New York costs more than California, Texas, and Florida combined. The first, second, and third largest states in the nation combined spend less money than we do. Now,
And just to put that in context, that the population of those three states combined would dwarf the state of New
absolutely.
York.
I mean, California dwarfs the state of New York. Let's say California, not exactly a conservative state.
Correct.
I assume their Medicaid program is pretty liberal. We spend significantly more than the state of California. And then you combine Texas and Florida, it's about the same, 3 states versus 1. So we have the most ridiculous generous plan in the state because basically the state of New York finances the healthcare system in New York. And the union, the 1199, calls all the shots on this once again. There was a great study a couple of years ago which we were supposed to close down a host of hospitals because there are empty hospitals all over the state of New York. They compromised it down to, I think, 11 hospitals, 12 hospitals, and I don't think the bulk of those have closed yet. So this is one of the great football.
They're not likely to
football.
close either with the governor whose father is a well-known lobbyist who represents all of them either.
My goodness, lobbyists and influence. Isn't that amazing? Okay,
No,
and
but it's-
father and son deals. I'm shocked.
It's
shocked,
lovely
okay.
architecture. I mean, and we're supposed to sit here and think even if the governor was to veto 1, 2, or 3 pieces of legislation, there's a rally cry that he's gotten religion, and the truth is he's a desperate politician seeking re-election.
Before we get off the Medicaid point, the New York Times had a story, an investigative report, went in depth, the New York Times, that concluded that 10% of the cost of Medicaid, I think the total's about what, 44 billion? Is that
About
right?
45 billion right now,
45
right.
billion. So you're talking about $4.5–5 billion is fraud and waste.
They said
that could be
that's
cut
the low
out.
ball number. It could be
Yes.
as high as 18 billion, says the New
Yes,
York
I'm
Times.
afraid to
Okay.
even say that number. This is the New York Times saying it could be as high as 18 billion. And we're just
Now,
scratching the
there are
surface here.
dentists filling like 500 cavities a day, okay? Billing for 500 cavities a day. They've nailed people in Brooklyn and elsewhere. The system is abusive. Everybody's looking the other way. The 1199 union calls the shots on this. No politician, Republican or Democrat. Once again, Republicans, when they were in the majority, lusted for the 1199 endorsements. And the guys who got it in special elections in recent times have lost as well because they lied to them. But so this is a tremendous
This is
mess.
a huge issue and a strong governor because that's where it starts. The investigative unit is in the governor's office and the governor has to go after that. And then the attorney general takes the cases that are referred to the attorney general by the governor. So it's the responsibility of the governor to crack down on the Medicaid.
And also, the governor of the
corresponding
state of New
abuse.
York has, the chief executive officer of the state of New York is the most powerful governor in the nation. We have had relatively weak governors in recent years who
But
refuse
explain
to
that
use
for
their
our
power.
audience, because they may not appreciate that fact.
The fact is, the governor sets the terms of the budget. He presented, this is a reform that went back to the days of Al Smith.
But the
Charles Evans
criticism-
Hughes.
Al Smith, Charles Evans
Hughes.
Hughes.
He chaired the
doing
committee for
right.
Governor Smith, put together the greatest reform we ever seen, the consolidation, the reorganization of the executive branch. Robert Moses, back in those days when he was working with Al Smith, was some of the genius in writing the legislation behind it. It was a phenomenal effort and worked, and they opposed it for years. The governor has the ability. The only governor that's really used that power well was Tom Dewey.
But now explain that, because people's perception of Albany is the three men in the room.
Well, the three men in the room because the governor permits it to become the three men in the room. There should really only be one man in the room, the governor of the state. Because the governor has complete control of the budget. The legislature can't change it. They go up and down, but they have to take that as the fundamental base of the budget.
But didn't a couple of years ago that the legislature, I'm sorry to
Let
interrupt you,
me-
George,
I-
but the legislature overrode the governor's budget and increased taxes.
Oh, no, they overrode his veto. See, the governor has
correct.
line-by-line veto, and the governor vetoed certain things, and they could override certain things. That is correct. But fundamentally, the governor, if he wants to stand tall, he could basically tell them, here's what we're going to spend, boys. You could fiddle and faddle at the inside of it, but we're not going over that. And if you're a strong governor, that's the way it works. Unfortunately, governors just have just negotiated away
Now
their
look,
power.
to make the assumption that people don't understand this, which you made with respect to this power of the executive, about 3 years ago, I think it was, the two houses of the legislature, in response to a Court of Appeals case, the highest court in the state, which affirmed the governor's powers to do this and to control the budget, the legislature tried to gut that by a constitutional amendment that they could put to the people, and it's called Prop 1. They put it out there in an election year when the mayor of New York was the primary candidate.
It was an off-year election.
It was an off year, and you expect more New York City voters who would vote for something like that to gut the powers, the executive powers of the governor with respect to the budget. And for, I think it's about 100, and of course the legislature and all the unions all were supporting Prop 1, and it was dressed up to look like reform. Well, guess what? For about $100,000 and this big pig that was carried across upstate New York, the voters got the message, and they voted against it overwhelming. Every election district in the state voted against, except for one here in the city. This is according to E.J. McMahon, who did a study
Yeah,
of this.
that is correct.
The voters here are basically fiscal conservative, and on this kind of arcane issue, they got it. They understood. And
me
this goes
follow up
back
on
to
it.
the idea that the revolt is on now. The property tax revolt, the tax revolt, the let's cut spending
and
revolt is here. It just has to be tapped into.
Let's add
politically.
one other statistic here, which is very important to this discussion. Because of people, taxpayers, voting with their feet and leaving, Galazano announced he'll save $5 million a year by making Florida his full-time address, and he said, I'd rather give that money to charity myself than have the state do it. But in the city of New York, there are 4.2 million households. 40,000 of those households pay 51% of the city income tax.
It's 1%.
You got it. 40,000. How many of those households do you think own a place in Florida? I bet a small entrepreneur
We're going to
in
be
New Hyde
losing
Park.
these people, and there goes our tax revenue. Let me ask you this. There's so many problems with New York State. I'm very pessimistic. I really don't think we're going to solve these problems in the next 5 or 10 years. Pensions is another one. Pensions and health benefits. But pensions, take a guess. I did a FOIL request in my school district in Long Island, Port Washington, for all the teachers that retired in 2008. What do you think the average pension was for a teacher? Take a guess.
I know, time, 60,000?
75,000.
75,
Ranged
okay.
from 61 to 101,000. And median and average was 75,000. They pay no state income taxes on
No
these
Social
pensions.
Security and no city income
No,
taxes in the
exactly,
city.
exactly. We've got a major pension problem. The two funds, the teacher retirement system and the New York State retirement system, totaled about $250 billion in assets prior to this fiscal crisis. They lost something like $65, $70 billion out of that $250 billion, $250 billion pension. We got to make it up. The taxpayers now have to make this up. My question is, we are, with the unions control both the Republican and Democratic parties, they have for decades now. Both parties are afraid to tackle this pension reform issue, going to a Tier 5, where, just like private industry, my old company, Verizon, everyone you match. You put in 50% and the company will match
Frank.
it. We don't get that from government. We have the taxpayers now are paying 94% of the pension costs. The teachers pay 3% a year for 10 years, which totals 6% of the total costs. What are the chances, and what do you think should be done with regard to going to a tier 4, tier 5, requiring all state and government and county and teachers to pay into the pension, say 5% a year for every year they work, not just 3% for 10 years?
Look, frankly, we should go, which most companies are going to now, from defined benefit plans to defined contribution plans. The 401ks that most of us now have for our retirement, and that is the way government should go also. So just a contribution, that's getting their part of the way, but we've got a long way to go before we solve this problem.
Many companies are suspending payments right now because of the weak economic conditions in the
Well,
economy.
they're spending their contributions.
New York
okay.
State taxpayers should have the same
Well,
opportunity.
here's, first of all, tier 5 is just a sop, okay? It will not improve things much. You have to go to a 401k. This system was put together for bus drivers who were making, Ralph Cramden, making $4,000 a year. I ran the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey. I downsized 1,800 jobs when I was there. A lot of people we did pension deals with and everything else to downsize the place. I had people 12 years ago when I was running that walking out of the door with $100,000 pensions. Port Authority Police Department, 1,800 cops, 20th largest police department in the state, in the nation. You got patrolmen walking out with north of $100,000 pensions. The system can't sustain itself. The Port Authority Police Department has a 400-page contract. 400-page contract. City of New York cops have a 26-page contract. The point is, it cannot sustain itself any longer.
Is there a chance the politicians will ever stand up to these
No,
unions?
it's again, the day of reckoning hasn't come. But here's the point. If you look at recently, just take the state pension system under the comptroller. A year ago, April 1st, stood at $154 billion. The numbers came down last week. It's down to $104 billion. The fixed income part, the bond part, was flat, which means the equity portion, the stock market portion, the hedge fund, the special alternative investments, the real estate investments, had to be down in value. The exact numbers aren't out there yet, but I calculate anywhere from 43 to 50% it's down. S&P was down 38% last year, so it could be as high as 50%. So the money management part of it did poorly. And then we have this pay-to-play scandal that's going on, where political hacks made millions upon millions of dollars. The former chairman of the Liberal Party got taken out in 2 sets of handcuffs.
For no services rendered.
He's ate well over the years, making millions of dollars on the taxpayers.
No investment services rendered. There's nothing.
Yeah, these in-between guys, we're seeing the effects of the scandal, and the compounding of the scandal is that the money was poorly managed over the last year. So that's issue one.
To that point, though, the comptroller openly supported investments in hedge funds at a time when...
Oh, increasing it.
Correct. Increasing it at a time when many in the marketplace were skeptical.
Tom DiNapoli.
Tom DiNapoli, who has little or no background in finance, made a decision that is quite questionable.
Now, we'll add to that. The comptroller's office has now stated, right now, 8% of payroll in a given school district, wherever, goes towards pensions. That number at a minimum will have to go up to 11%. They also project it could go as high as 30% of payroll.
It will go higher than 11, I can assure you.
Okay. So 401ks,
what's the chances, though, that we'll get someone to run for governor and for our state senate and assembly, for our legislature, who will take a stand that in fairness to everyone. Now, we don't want to hurt the teacher. I have 5 teachers in my family, my wife, my mother, a daughter, and 2 daughters-in-law. I had a father-in-law who was a policeman, but the policemen in Long Island, not in the city, to be honest, city policemen are not overpaid, but the suburban policemen, $120,000 salaries, pensions of $100,000, $250,000 payout bonuses when they leave. Is there a chance that we'll get a gubernatorial and legislature candidates who will take a stand that we've got to alter our health benefits and pension benefits?
And I agree with that. I mean, about city policemen, and there's something, it's not just a question about, it's a question of the service delivered.
Right.
And a lot of these people want to deliver the service, but there's a huge bureaucracy. There's a corruption, as in Medicaid, which could be as high as $18 billion. As we said, you go over all these issues and the people leaving the state because of them. And you go back to what happened with Prop 1, the way is voted down by the people. There is really a revolt that's going on. It's up to us as Republicans, conservatives, independents to lay the political groundwork for in the next election, going out there, raising these issues, and you will find the people of New York coming out to support it. This is going to be the big issue in the upcoming campaigns. And I think if the parties get themselves organized and get themselves aligned properly and then nominate the right candidates, someone like Congressman King, we could, in fact, turn things around. As in fact it was done in Massachusetts. You know, they have their 2.5% property
Yeah.
cap, a hard cap on
Right.
property taxes. It's working.
Right.
It's cut down the costs and people are staying in Massachusetts as a result because there's a succession of Republican governors who stood for fiscally responsible policies. There's no reason why that can't happen here if
I'm
we put out
hoping-
candidates who really believe in those principles and go out and stand by them and start pushing them. You'll find
I
the
hope,
body
I
politic
hope, Ed, you're
reacting.
right. We see some candidates. I haven't seen any. I'm a conservative party leader. I'm disgusted even with my own party and how we've been endorsing Republican senators who fail to stand up on these critical issues because they're terrified of the unions. I mean, part of it is the voters' fault that we are so ignorant and we don't inform ourselves in who we vote for, so the Republicans get as bad as the Democrats and they kowtow to these public unions. Well, Mike,
Well,
you go
I
for
would
the
just
next
say,
question.
yeah, I mean, I would just say, I think we hit on a point here, which is what is the breaking point in terms of addressing these issues, and is it fair to look at what's going on in private industry, say with General Motors and United Auto Workers, to say, is that a parallel? Because many of these people now are having their benefits, retirees are seeing their benefits clipped.
That's why sympathy is right. For instance, when you had the transit workers strike in New York City a couple of Christmases ago,
2005.
when the average New Yorker realized that the average income of a transit worker was $60,000 and the average work of the New Yorker income was $38,000, that strike, in addition to doing Christmas and everything else, it fell flat on its face because people say, you gotta be crazy. I'm making 38 grand a year, you're making 60 and you're whining to me? When you look at what government is costing, you look at the salaries, you look at the pensions, and word gets out there, people are beginning to catch on saying, what gives here?
What
You know,
about
you're
the
working-
And,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
by the
yeah.
way, this is not the union members. This is the leaders of
Leadership.
unions who
That's
want to
right.
hold on to their own jobs.
And didn't they convince
so they-
95% of the Long Island Railroad retirees to claim disability, and
Oh,
they're
it's
getting
part of
disability
the-
insurance?
part of the sham.
Which is costing us
Yeah.
tens of millions of dollars?
It's if you look at, you take Path Subway, 14-mile subway, most expensive subway system that connects New York and New Jersey, most expensive subway system in the world. Fare box recovery is only about 28%, 29%. Normally it's about 50%. That's the rule. New York City is 50%. The Path Subway comes under the Federal Railroad Act. I tried to get it undone and almost got it undone, but the unions killed it when it got to the Secretary of Transportation in the Clinton administration. As a result of that, it comes under completely more onerous rules because they treat it like it's a freight train traveling across the country. Now, some of the people who take the train may think it's a freight train ride sometimes, but I'll give you an example. You know the repair trains that you see, you know, they got like a car, caboose and whatnot, and they work on the tracks?
Right.
Well, under the Federal Railroad Act, that caboose and little train where a couple of guys work on the tracks has to have a conductor on it. Has to have a conductor. What do you think that conductor does all day long? Besides eat bagels and, you know, play cards and do something
Read
and
your
smoke
recent
cigars.
book?
Okay, oh, yeah, I'm sure they read my book, okay. The point is, the rules that have been put together over the years, when you look at these contracts, they are so onerous, you don't really run the operation yourself. And that path, that 13-mile path subway system, 14-mile subway system, has 19 unions. 19 unions you got to negotiate with. And people just roll over dead because New Jersey gets very upset because that's a suburban commuter subway system. And so Christine Whitman sold out on it, Corzine sells on it. They don't want to touch it because it upsets people.
Upsets
So
the
this,
unions, yeah.
this whole union mess just gets bigger and bigger because everybody walks away from it. And that's what we've seen in Albany over the years, look the other way. The point I think we're making today is the day of reckoning is around the corner. And either one or two things are going to happen. We're going to have a tremendous revolt, and or California is going to start the trend here. California is on the verge of becoming a ward of the federal government. And the boys in Albany, as they're welcoming the stimulus money, that may be their answer down the road. The lefties that are up there saying, well, we'll kind of war of the state, federal government, where the state becomes basically an administrative arm of the federal government. For years, they've been trying to destroy tax exemption on bonds, a triple tax exemption, federal, state, and city tax-free on bonds. This may become part of this whole plan. Already you've had, what do they call the America bonds, that California, in effect, the federal government guaranteed and put up a portion of the the municipal bonds, state bonds that were issued in California. So you're seeing an
a backstop.
ideological trend going on here, which our friends in Albany may welcome and say, well, it'll be their problem then, not my problem anymore.
Well, let me say, we got to be very careful of this. You got to get in there and work with the details. There are some good union leaders. There have been historically. John L. Lewis and what he did with the mine workers union, where he permitted their salaries to go up, but permitted technology. There was huge attrition in it.
It's balanced.
But there was a balance. You got to look for those good leaders, work with them, and try and get that kind of support. You just can't say, just paint everyone
Right.
with a broad brush. And that's part of the political solution here.
But part of what unions have represented, at least in regard to the railroad, has been there has not been any innovation. There's been an ability to subdue levels of innovation. And the best example is we have a very expensive, albeit automated train system within JFK and within the airport that requires no train conductor and no driver. And it's completely automated utilizing technology, yet we are looking to increase compensation to the people that are working on a system that is outdated and may no longer serve the needs of the people. That's just one example, but I want to get into property taxes in the suburbs.
Well,
because
before you do, Mike, we didn't touch on health insurance. We only got about 4 minutes, and that's a major cost. State employees, public school employees have health insurance costs averaging about $15,000 per employee. Family plans, maybe it's $12,000, $10,000 for individuals. It's paid about 80 to 100% by the taxpayers. In school districts, maybe 90% on average. For the state and county, in many places, it's 100% paid by the taxpayers. Now, private industries abandon this. We're going to places where the employees pay a quarter to a half of the health insurance costs. We have in New York State, it's law that if you work for 5 years, you can retire. And people don't know this. My superintendent was unaware of this. You can work for 5 years, retire at age 55 after working 5 years, you're guaranteed health benefits paid for life. This is mind-boggling. What can we do about this? Is there any chance at all we'll be able to change this? Because that's a huge part of our school budgets and our state, town, county budgets.
Well, the other portion we have to keep in mind, there is a study going on, we'll see the results sooner or later, is the unfunded liability of retirees on health care, not just as pension, health care. New Jersey, which has ignored it for decades, the number is like $80 billion unfunded liability just on the health care. Forget about the unliability of the pension system, which is huge as well. So that's another thing that haunts us there. But Frank, you raised the great questions. There has to be a complete change in Albany, and somebody has to stand up and say the unions. When I go after the unions, in this case, I'm talking about the municipal unions, which is the biggest. They control the bulk of the pie of union members in the United States today. Municipal unions are calling the shots in Albany until someone gets up and says, enough. It's not going to change until we default on something, go bankrupt, or become wards of the federal government. So we need a revolution
Ed, what
in
do you
Albany.
think?
Look, we've got to cut the cost of health care. That's a basic issue that's here. And New York State can do that simply by changing a couple laws. One, let New York State residents buy health insurance any place around the country. Our son is one of the uninsured. He's 30 years old. He doesn't need insurance. He doesn't need a chiropractor. He doesn't need a podiatrist, but he's got to pay for all those mandates. He just needs catastrophic health insurance. He could buy that for $120 a month in Kansas, but he can't buy it here in New York. I can point to other specific laws. If we change them, we could cut drastically the cost of health care here in New York State and health care insurance.
But it takes political will.
Takes political will. George is absolutely right.
We're down to our last minute. What do you think are the chances? Give me a number. What are the chances that in the next 3 years, by 2012, that we will be able to, the voters will wake up and be able to elect people that will face up to these explosive issues?
We have an election in 2010, statewide election. We even have 2 U.S. senators running at the same time next year. There's a revolt that's coming on. I think we're going to be sitting on the local level starting this year, and I think there's a good possibility we see a serious revolt and a lot of people getting thrown out of office next year. So I'm optimistic about the revolution.
We're going to see victories for Republican candidates, tossed out Democratic governors in New Jersey, in this November, New Jersey, and Virginia, and Westchester County, and other counties across New York State, because people want real change now, fiscally responsible change.
I want to thank George Marlin and Ed Cox very, very much for taking the time to come on this show. We are all very concerned about the fiscal future of New York State, and it looks very dismal at this point. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you all next week at the same time on the same channel.
This program was brought to you by the American Family
All right,
Association of New York. If you'd like to receive AFA's free newsletter, write us at P.O. Box 203, Port Washington, New York, 11050, or call us at 516-944-3544. Our newsletter and TV schedule are on our website at www.afany.org. Your comments are welcome, and thanks for being with us.